Hi, I'm Jim Jager. I am the Facility Security Officer and the Business Continuity Director here at Port of Alaska. That means I'm responsible for keeping this port safe and for keeping it operational in the event of changing in business cycles, disasters, or other things that might try to shut our operation down. Port of Alaska is the state's main inbound cargo port, which is a big deal for us up here in Alaska. Everybody thinks of Alaska as being a big chunk of land that hangs off of the edge of Canada. We're really more like an island, though, when it comes to supplying the folks up here in Alaska. We do not manufacture a lot of consumer goods up here, and we don't grow much food. So that means if people are going to eat something or consume goods, they pretty much have to be shipped into the state of Alaska. More than 90% of the goods that come into the state on a ship or a barge. If you look at everything that gets shipped into the state, half of it crosses our dock, and half of the goods and the food that crosses our dock ends up somewhere else outside of Anchorage in another part of the state. Port of Alaska really has three roles in life: commerce, national defense, and disaster recovery and response. The commerce role is the role of bringing goods into the state for Alaska. Port of Alaska provides food security for the state of Alaska. About 80% of the containers that come into the state cross our dock. Those containers carry the food that Alaskans rely upon. Last year we brought in about 4.7 million tons of fuel and freight that were consumed all across the state of Alaska. That was about $14.3 billion worth of economic activity was generated directly out of this port. Those goods flow from Anchorage to every other part of Alaska, including southeast and far western Alaska. The national defense role: we are one of 17 commercial strategic seaports in the DoD portfolio. We are responsible for supplying the Department of Defense missions across Alaska, the Pacific Rim, and up into the Arctic. And the disaster response and recovery role is we're responsible for feeding the state of Alaska when times are good and after a disaster. Virtually every federal government and state government disaster response plan for South Central Alaska fails if the Port of Alaska isn't functioning. If we want to get goods into the state in a cost-effective fashion, Port of Alaska's docks have to be working. Port of Alaska really has two threats to its cargo operations: dock failure and electrical system failure. We're dealing with the dock failure with the Port of Alaska modernization program. That's a dock replacement program. Our docks started opening up in 1961. They are long past both their economic and their design life. The ships that serve Alaska and the cargo systems that serve Alaska today are much different than what this dock was designed to handle, so they're relatively inefficient. They're also getting old and corroding and at risk of falling into the ocean. So the Port of Alaska modernization program is going to replace the docks with new modern docks that are built to modern cargo standards and that should last for another 75 years in Alaska's Upper Cook Inlet's extreme climate and seismic conditions. Port of Alaska is working with Launch Alaska to address the risks to our electrical supply. We're developing and implementing a port power plan that will turn the port into what's called a connected microgrid. It will receive most of its power from Chugach and the rail belt grid, but in the event of an emergency that takes the grid out, Port of Alaska will be able to island itself, generate its own power, and keep port operations going. The port power plan is really going to do four things. It's going to improve our operational resiliency, reliability, and security. It's going to reduce power costs for port users. It's going to improve the power system's flexibility so that we can adopt new technologies like electric vehicles. And it's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the port and port-related operations. The Port Power Plan is going to incorporate the microgrid and all the switching and controls needed to turn the port into a microgrid. It will have a large battery that will help us level our port loads and keep us operational in the event of an outage. And it will have a solar component that will let us generate renewable power without greenhouse gas emissions to help power the port.